Some people have demanded better getting hi and welcome, so hopefully that was better. So, all right, World War III update. There you go. You like allergens. Before I jump into this, I'm gonna give a shout out to Canadian Prepper again. I think out of all the prepper channels on the planet, this guy is, I don't know what his first name is or anything like that, but I think him and I are like-minded on a lot, so we don't agree on everything, but I like the way he analytically goes about things. Like he's an analyst on every little issue. He's very, very technical on a lot of stuff. His video quality is excellent, dude. It's not just like a guy sitting in an armchair with a lamp. You're trying to. That's the highest effects I can get there. He does a lot of good stuff. I did a video about World War III, whether it's going to happen or not, and the people that believe in it and people that don't believe it's going to happen, that type of thing. He wasn't the prepper I was talking about. Incidentally, I guess that great minds think alike or whatever, because he kind of came out with something similar, saying that, there is a lot of fear porn out there, and I agree with that. That's why I don't like to use words like imminent and stuff like that. But that said, one of the things I try to do with my channel is always trying to go with, here's the dot. You think for yourself. If you think it's imminent, that's up to you, and you can take your actions accordingly, right? That's all I really try to accomplish, is to inform. Fear porn, I mean, it's all going to be a bit fear pornish. I mean, we're talking about pretty much the worst case scenario. I mean, we're talking like the extinction of the dinosaurs, but man-made. You know what I mean? Like that type of thing with the nuclear weapons. So we're talking about very horrible, scary, terrifying things. So there's going to be some sensationalization of that. There's no doubt about that. And of course, the way I've revamped my channel, he's talking about like all the people putting out stuff. I don't think he was talking about me, but I do realize that recently, after the YouTube attack of demonetizing, a lot of YouTubers had to reinvent their wheel for their channels to keep their monetization up. One of the things I've done is this new format of World War IIIs, which come out every few days instead of every few weeks, which gives you more informed, but it comes off a little more fear pornish because they're so frequent. So I just wanted to point that out. That's never my goal. That's why when people ask me, is it going to happen, by next Wednesday? When do you think it's going to happen? And I get good questions like, do you think one girl asked, do you think Mexico will be hit? I don't think Mexico is going to take a nuke, but because they're so close to the States, the fallout the radiation is going to reach there. Maybe not everywhere in Mexico. Mexico is pretty big, but that's a great question. Another person asked, like, what's really going to be targeted in World War III? And I did a whole kind of World War III targets, and you can't there's stuff that they're going to hit that I'm never going to think of. It's like they're going to hit like a bridge in the middle of nowhere. And you say, why the hell would they have hit a bridge in the middle of nowhere with a nuke? And then you find out if a war started, that would be like a complete choke point. They would be able to conquer right up to that bridge and hold it. You know what I mean? Like things like that. I mean, if you look at World War II, bridges were probably even more important than refineries in some cases. I think bridges were, lots of men died, many men died on a bridge too far. You know what I'm saying? That type of thing. So, but Canadian Prepper made some really good points in there, but there's one thing that, he said that I think I've said it quite a few times too, is take everything with a grain of salt, because, again, we're all access to the same information. Again, this is just the stuff a guy like me can figure out, okay? This is the stuff, can you imagine what they're not telling us? It's behind the scenes, I'm sure, especially with Biden's comments there about, I'll get to it later, when he was asked, we're going to send signals to the Russians, and the reporter asked, are the people going to know about it? He goes, I hope not. And he did say that with very good reassurance, you know what I mean? Like, so what lunacy, and we're seeing, trust me, those signals are picking up right away. And I'll get into all that stuff as we go. But I just wanted to address that because, I do agree with what he is saying on a lot of stuff, and I did agree with that other prepper. I think it's American Homesteader prepper. I found this, but anyway, I think these guys make great points. But I think where I disagree with them and guys like them is that they're taking into consideration the rationality of these elites, that that they'll take us to this level, but they're going to go 99%, but they're never going to cross that detrimental 1%. But there's so many other factors that we can't even account for, like, what happens when a Russian pilot tangles with a U.S. pilot over Syria and one shoots down the other, or they clip wings or whatever. I think you're going to see a lot of incidents like that, where, you're going to see a lot of damage before it kicks off as a war. But where's the miscalculation? What happens if the Russians really get paranoid and think, you know what, the Joe Biden's signaling, so to speak, behind the scene, they take it as, oh my God, they just launched on us, like Operation Able Archer. Like, I mean, we've already been on the brink of war during the least ramped up time. I always suggest, how many, like on the brink, in the 1950s, Delta daggers up in Alaska had to get scrambled because a black bear climbed a fence, and then they had nukes in the belly ready to go right into Russia. I mean, they were, the times are not, you'd think they're that much more advanced, but they're really not. There was in the 1980s, there was that war game where the computer basically had a simulator launch go on, and it had us that far before people figured out it was the simulator was still on, meaning they thought, the Americans thought the Russians were actually launching on them. And they were about to launch, and the Russians would have been completely unaware, until so that said, somebody pulls out, back then you used to pull out these big circuit boards and put in another circuit board, and that was your program. Now it's just, run program, whatever. But, things can happen. Things can happen, and things that we don't account for. And dead man switch. Somebody shows up, Ivan got a little bit too drunk the night before and forgets to show up for work one day, and the dead man switch kicks on. Like that type of thing. And there is a dead man switch, which I think went active in 2012. And, it's just, and then you just have to factor in the psychopathicness and the religiously insanity of some of these people. Some of these people do believe in the end times prophecy and, trying to force the hand a little. So there's so many angles that we can't account for. So what I do try to do with this channel, and I know I'm going on a bit long now, but I do believe it's important that I do this, is that my goal is never to say this is imminent. All I can say is 2 + 2 = 4. You can't eat more food than you can grow. You can't spend more money than you make. If we keep going on these paths, again, this time last year, I was not talking about the crazy stuff I'm talking about this year. The frequency is a little higher, but of World War III updates. But the movements, we're seeing them slowly increment. Some stuff that was like the drill what Russia did with the 40 million civilians and calling people back home. I want to address that pretty soon too. Because, yes, I've said Russia is milking this one. But them doing a drill for these fallout shelter, but they do for the civilians. They do it every year. It's just this is the first year they did 40 million people. For 40 million people. So that type of thing. Now with the U.S. election, now we'll get into it. It's just I wanted to make that clear that my goal isn't to fear porn. I don't think he was referring to me, but there's things he said in Canadian Prepper said in his video. I'll see if I can link it down below because it was an excellent video. And I'm going to see if I can find that other guy's video too, American Homesteader, American Homestead Prepper, whatever his name was. Both guys seem to have some really good points in there, and to decipher the fear porn from the what's good. That's why I never say imminent, World War III imminent. I mean, yes, guys like Alex Jones will say everything's imminent because he makes his money scaring the shit out of people. That's not my goal. But I do think that we can, again, this is why I tell people, don't be afraid to go back and listen to some of my earlier World War III updates. If you go back to 2010 when I started doing the World War III updates, I think it was around 2010-ish. Okay. The stuff I'm talking about just today is so much more radical than what it was back then. That's how things have escalated. So we're seeing it doing this. It's a slow line, but all of a sudden one day it just goes boom, and we're into it. So anyway, I just want to get on to, just wanted to make that point very, very clear. Now we'll get into the video. So one of the things that, with the U.S. election coming up, and we've had Russian, a whole bunch of Russian, prominent figures come out and say, elect Trump or there's going to be war, that type of thing. They're very scared. Now, the Russians, okay, and again, and some people bash on me for getting on Vladimir Putin's case, but again, Putin, yes, he's great with the populism, and probably the highest rated politician in history. 80 to 90% approval rating. But if the Russian people love him, they love him. That's fine. And if it's doctor, even if they spun it, if they spun it, I'm pretty sure people don't love him that much. But let's say he's got half of what he said. A 40% approval rating to 45% approval rating for a politician is that's like godlike status for a politician. They never get that. Harper's highest, I think, was in the mid-30s, which was actually quite high. Trudeau, I don't know where he's at right now, but I think that's going to fall very quickly. Ronald Reagan, I think, was the highest in America with 54% approval rating. These approval ratings really tell you, and if you can break the 50% mark, you're doing something right. You're definitely doing something right, or you're very convincing, one or the other. Yeah. So there's that. Now, Putin, you have to understand, okay, they're looking at this election, and again, right now they've got the best live-fire training exercise called the Syrian War. They're milking that too. They don't want that war to end anytime soon. It gives them an excuse to ramp up their military-industrial complex. The new Cold War does benefit Russia as well. They do get to ramp up the military. They're going to milk it. They're going to milk it. So they could be willing participants to a good degree. That's why they do the saber rattling. If the Russians really wanted to really back things off, they would completely stop the saber rattling with the Bear bombers flying. They would let things calm down a bit. So they do that too. They provoke it a little bit, but they usually poke. But the Russians, the way they do it is they do it in response to. So they wait till the Americans do something like a drill, and then they do a drill. Well, we're just responding to that. So they milk it, which there's kind of a big. The defense of that is, well, if they really are taking it as a serious threat, which they are. It's like, well, they have to do these drills. It's just they one up the drill. You do a 10,000-man drill, we'll do a 100,000-man drill, that type of thing, and that type of thing. But there is no doubt, in all honesty, I do believe the Russians are trying to keep us out of the war. I do think that it does show clear enough that there's enough rhetoric coming out of Russia from their prominent elites that are non-hawkish, that they're not talking about going to war or preemptive strikes, or provoking war. They don't seem to really generally want, because you can only say, well, we don't want war for so long, and then we'll catch you in a lie somewhere down the road. Hillary Clinton, yes, I'm going to go. If I'm president, I'm going to war with Iran. And then, of course, her most recent statements that anything will be taken, as an act of aggression. If a cyber attack, we can use military response to a cyber attack. Yeah, these people, they really tell you what their plans are. These people are hawkish. You're not hearing that from the Russian side, so that's in their defense there. And again, their government, as bad as my government is, I wouldn't want the Russian government over mine. And my government's pretty damn bad, you know what I mean? But, theirs, I think, is worse in a lot of areas. That's that thing. That said, you guys know what I feel about Justin Trudeau. So that takes a lot for me to say that. But I think my end is a little less over the deep end than... same like, Obama versus Trudeau. I hate to say it, but I'd rather take Trudeau. Although Trudeau is going to lead us to Obama. You know what I mean? Harper was our best bet. I know people get mad when I say that. I'm not a Harper fan. I never was. He was a globalist. He's a neocon, a Zionist, a sympathizer. There's no doubt about that. But Trudeau, at least Harper did it with he could count, a semi-balanced budget. But Trudeau, no. So one angle I want to get back to with Russia here is that before the election, yes, they're going to ramp up the fear porn. Oh my God, we're on the brink of war. We're on the brink of war. Elect Donald Trump. Why? Where Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden and John Kerry say that Russia's out there trying to manipulate the U.S. election. Well, they are throwing in influence in that type of thing, trying to show the American people, oh my God, look, the Russians are terrified. Vote towards Trump. Yes, they're going to play that in their hook because it's in the best interest that Trump is probably. It's in their best interest from the language from Trump. They're willing to it sounds to me like they're willing to take a gamble with Trump because he sounds like he's willing to negotiate rather than just ramp things up. So from a strategic point of view, if it means, this also signals to me that the Russians don't want war. Because they're like, well, if we get Trump, if we're going to signal for Trump, it's because Trump seems to be kind of a little bit, he's not anti-military, he's anti-interventionist, I think. But who knows, he is an authoritarian. He could completely work with Russia and then go batshit crazy on Iran. It's really hard to say. With Trump, there's going to be gambles. There's no doubt about that. But I think it's the best direction to go. Again, I don't envy the position the States is in right now. So that's some things to take into account. I know I'm leading on a little bit long before I get into the actual news here, but I think these are very important points to take into consideration. That there's manipulation on all sides. Canadian Prepper's 100% right about that. There's manipulation on all sides. Now that said, I think I already got it here. So I'm going to start off in Yemen. So the U.S. is now starting to do counter strikes, and they're talking about basically going into Yemen, boots on the ground type of thing. I don't know how many boots on the ground, but basically Saudi Arabia has been getting its ass kicked so bad by the Houthis. We've in the recent couple of weeks we've seen more Abrams tanks being shipped out to Saudi. All these tanks and everything you're seeing shipped across the United States, a lot of them are probably going to Saudi Arabia. Now, something the Americans have to keep in mind: if you're going to start a war with Russia, you might not want to sell all your tanks to freaking Saudi Arabia. You're going to have nothing left. I mean, they've only got like 6,000 Abrams. I don't know how many patents they have left, but M60s. But again, you don't want to be putting M60s up against the new stuff. You know what I mean? The new Russian stuff. It'll work out very bad. That type of thing. So the Abrams, maybe they're manufacturing new ones and just getting rid of the older ones. I don't know. But yeah, the Houthis are kicking their ass. That's why the Americans, said that the Houthis were firing missiles at their warships on 2 occasions. So they took out 3 radar installations. That'll help the Saudis a bit. Because the Saudis have lost like warships, they've lost tanks, they've lost all kinds of like the Saudi military. This is the strangest thing about the Saudis. They have 2 of every weapon imaginable and some. You know what I mean? Like they're loaded to the teeth with weapons. Problem is they don't really have the good training on them. Their military doesn't seem to be that well trained. Or disciplined. Again, these ragtag farmers with the rusted out AKs are just wreaking havoc. Now they do have Iranian. I think where the Houthis, why they're doing so well is because they're guided by the Iranians. And I will say the Iranian military is not too bad. I would give them, technology-wise, 1970s to 1980s type of military, maybe even early 90s military. They're a little bit behind the times in some of their technology, but their training seems to be good. It was the same as the Iraqi Republican Guard. The average Iraqi soldier was, just, filling a suit, but their upper echelon guys were excellent. Their intelligence guys, the top brass in the Iraqi Republican Guard were really good, but there were so few and far between that, and then Saddam's army was like a 1970s, 1950s to 1970s army. So they were still so analog that they couldn't take advantage of their guys, that type of thing. But the Iraqi special forces are actually pretty good. It's just there's not very many of them. So that's why they're right now, like they're doing well in Mosul and stuff like that. The Iraqi military is going onto it. Plus the extra training from the U.S. that's helped them out a bit. But when it comes to over there in Iran. The Iraqis are kind of, I wouldn't say compliant with Iran, but they do share intelligence. So, because the Iraqis, they want to jump ship from the Americans. There's no doubt about that. But they can't because the Americans will just go back in and blow them up again with A-10s. That type of thing. Again, if you look at the success of Desert Storm and Desert Shield and Desert Fox and Iraqi Liberation, Operation Iraqi Liberation, oil, they couldn't have made it more obvious. The precision in which the U.S. hit to crumble the regime was like the 30-day war, and they had Saddam down. They had it down in Desert Storm, and then of course the occupation. That said, the U.S. can end the war very easily in the Middle East by pulling out and just stop arming people. But we see that this offensive moving now in Mosul, okay, as safe passage has been given by the Iraqi military, they're giving ISIS, and the United States is giving ISIS about 9,000 of them safe passage to Syria. Okay, but I guess anybody that's not going along with it, that wants to stay in Iraq and fight, that's how they're dividing who's a moderate rebel, and that's how you find out who the mercenaries are. You got to understand, Mosul is a long way from Syria, so that's a lot of safe passages. If you had A-10s flying in the air, it's amazing. Again, ISIS gets luckiest jihadists. They just get this safe passage, that much of a strip to get into Syria. Again, it's a proxy war, right? So people are seeing it for what it is. So the UK, right now, Russia is sending more their aircraft carrier and a few other ships to the Mediterranean, and they're going around. They're going to be going around via Scotland and coming down and taking the long trip around, so to speak. And the UK is definitely kind of nervous on that, so they're going to be shadowing their ships with their warships. So again, we have British warships, in the vicinity of Russian warships. When opposing warships are 1,000 miles from each other, they're too close. That type of thing. So the thing about that is we see Russia really sending a lot of naval support to the Middle East. That said, they've got enough naval support that they can do this. How long they're going to be there? Well, as these ships are leaving, new ships are coming in. We're seeing, again, where it used to be, okay, a ship would go from a month or so, and then it would come back. And then there'd be nothing, then a couple of weeks later or something. Now it's just completely, they're passing each other in the night, you know what I mean? So there's that. Clinton emails. I always say all wars are bankers' wars, all wars are for Israel. And a lot of people don't seem to really comment a lot on that, but until I mentioned the Greater Israel Project, the Odin-Yan plan, and they're like, what is that? Well, this is what we're seeing in the Middle East, is the balkanization of the Middle East, to break it up into these little tiny ethno-states. So, and you heard John Kerry talk about it, exactly the way the Odin-Yan plan was supposed to play out. The idea is to break down the Middle East into such small regions that nothing can ever challenge Israel. So the amount of death and destruction that they did with this, that's what the divide and conquer is about the Middle East. It's for Israel. So all this death and destruction, at the end of the day, not just for Israel. There's a lot of others, pipelines, there's a petrodollar, but it's all linked. It's all one system, right? And one of the things that we see in the Middle East is that, the Odin-Yan plan taking place. Now, the people who fund it are the bankers, so all wars are bankers' wars. Now, a little bit more proof of this is Assange leaked email reveals a ring of missiles around China. Basically, this is what Hillary Clinton from 3 years ago said to Goldman Sachs bankers. So why would Hillary Clinton be telling Goldman Sachs guys about a ring of missiles around China? And what do we see today? The THRAD systems being put up all over the place. Basically, the THRAD system is like the upgraded version of the Patriot missile system. Same concept, anyway. They use the PAC-3 missile. The PAC-3 missile is used in the Aegis Ollie-Burke class warships. They're used on, the Patriot missile system and the THRAD system. It's all pretty much the same. But again, it shows the establishment, Warhawk establishment. Again, Hillary Clinton is basically whatever AIPAC wants, she'll do, which is, AIPAC wants everything for Israel. Again, brings us back full circle. Bankers' wars, Israel wars, right? So these are the links. So that's what you need to do. Need to know. The U.S. give $195 million in radars in Kuwait. Basically, these are to detect low-flying attack helicopters and stuff like that. I'm not aware of exactly which radar system it is, but we do know that the Russians are flying Hinds all over, Hinds and soon to be, I think they're already in there, but the Ka-50s and the Ka-52s. The Ka-52s is a very high-tech helicopter for what the Russians have. Their two high-tech helicopters are the Ka-52 Alligator, which is a dual-rotor, coaxial rotor. One rotor three blades go this way, the other three blades go this way. These things are quite the helicopters. They're very maneuverable. They can do loops, barrel rolls. They spin on their axis. They climb at 1,800 feet a minute. For a helicopter, that's pretty fast. Some of them might, with the newer upgrades, they probably climb like 2,500 feet a minute. To put you into perspective, a Spitfire climbed maybe 30,300 feet per minute. Something like, say, a piston-driven Hawker Hurricane, one of the fastest piston-driven, just out of World War II, early 1950s fighter jets. Probably, that thing climbed a mile a minute. The Vought Corsairs climbed 5,200 feet per minute, a mile a minute. These things, the later Spitfires climbed around that. So it gives you an idea. how fast these helicopters are climbing. And they're 200 mile per hour capable. I think the Ka-50 tops out at 212 miles an hour. The Hind 24 held a world record for a while at 240 miles an hour. Combat speeds are going to be slower, but the case in point is these are powerful machines, and they're very, very fast. 2,500 horsepower jet engines, helicopter engines, stuff like that. So these things, they carry a lot of Vicar missiles. There's 12 of those. They've got the KR-29 or whatever missile that they can fire. So these alligators, the surgical striking is what they're going to be good at. And of course, they're backed up with a walloping 30 millimeter, 460 rounds cannon. I know the aircraft quite well. I used to play the video game Ka-52 and stuff like that. And that was basically the Russian answer to the Apache. They have a side-mounted gun, that type of thing. But the idea is that they're upgraded. Their next highest tech helicopter is the MIL-28 Havoc. Now this thing looks more in line with the Apache. It has a center-focused 30 millimeter cannon, which could also be switched out for 23 millimeters. They carry bombs, rockets, 122 millimeter rockets, 80 millimeter rockets. The Havoc is probably slightly more advanced in some ways than the Ka-52, probably even a little bit more maneuverable. It has a tandem pilot and weapons officer up front, that type of thing. 16 Vicar missiles, 4 Iglas, 40 rockets, 500 rounds of 30 mil. Yeah, that's some severe tank busting. And again, they can be set up for close support with 23 millimeter cannon or gun pods, and they're just incredible machines. So if these things are going to be making excursions, and once the attack helicopters come in, then like it goes bomber, fighter, or it goes fighters, bombers, then attack helicopters. You bring in the attack helicopters once you got the air defense systems pretty much out of the way, and then you can really get surgical in stuff like that. That's why, like, the A-10s and the Apaches, I think, are one of the best things the Americans have ever made. I don't know why Canada doesn't have, 500 Apache helicopters and 1,000 A-10s, backed up by, say, 400, CF-18s or something like that. That would be like an Air Force and a half. Why so many A-10s? Well, you don't need them. You don't need them in the beginning, but when you get air superiority, then you can have like a blitzkrieg and pretty much take out ISIS strongholds all in like 2 days. Like takes like 6 months just to figure out where you're going to hit, get them all to settle down, and just hit them all in one night. The U.S. could do that if they wanted right now, but I think there's only like 1,500 A-10s that were built, but maybe more. But again, I think the A-10, F-15 and A-10 and F-18 is all the Americans need, or Super Hornets. Good enough, Everything else, they, just upgrade them, keep them, and they'd be good enough. But anyway, I digress. So the radar's going there. Build-ups in Djibouti. The Americans are starting to build up there. Just so you know. North Korea, Muson missile, I think is what they're calling it. Probably butchered the name. The new rockets that they're Kim Jong-un's new space rocket, these things are reaching the edge of outer space now. So they're not intercontinental yet, but they do believe they have a range to reach Alaska. So that's pretty impressive. That's a pretty far-ranging missile. We see the North Koreans are slowly incrementing. They're probably most likely getting, definitely they're getting missile technology from the Chinese. There seems to be like overwhelming evidence of that because of these missiles do tend to have a very Chinese in appearance kind of look, which makes sense between China does. I don't know how much if they're losing control on North Korea, but they do pretty much run North Korea. That's that's who the North Koreans kind of are in a sense. Yes, the North Korean people were there before China invaded back in the 1950s, creating the conditions for the Korean War, but that's who was invading. That's who the North Chinese were back in the North Koreans were back in the 1950s. Was the Chinese coming in with North Korean sympathizers? They joined up. They were running south. They met a an Allied wall coming down, and they stopped at the 39th parallel. 39th? Yeah, 38th parallel, 39th parallel. Wherever the North Korea, South Korea. forget what parallel they're at, but anyway. And they've had an armistice ever since. So not a ceasefire, but an armistice. Getting back to what Russia was saying, a vote for Hillary is a vote to war. This comes out of a Russian, dignitary or whatever. And of course, Russia out there saying they're going to back China in the South China Sea. Russia's 1-year anniversary in Syria and all the stuff they've taken. They're starting to show their hand a little bit now. Like I said, right from the get-go, they'd be training Syrian Arab army guys like that on everything. They even brought in the Cubans last year to help the Syrians, to train them on the tank crews. Remember, the Cubans and the Russians have been working together for a long time, so, anywhere Russia actually does go, Nicaragua, Venezuela, Cuba, they're going to take on the Russian, training. The Russians don't just sell you a tank, they show you how to use it too. Maybe the Saudis could maybe that's why the Saudis are also trying to do some deals with the Russians as well. We'll take a lower grade of tank, just show us how to use the damn thing. We can't fight these freaking farmers over there. Because the Iranians are showing the Houthis how to fight, these ragtag guys how to fight. Again, guerrilla warfare, that type of stuff. Very successful. But they're showing, basically, they've taken back like 700 areas for civilians, putting hundreds of thousands of people back to their homes in Syria, talking about positions destroyed, prominent leaders, how many ISIS guys they killed. To the Russians, anybody on the ground fighting Assad's troops is going to be considered ISIS. You know what I mean? That type of thing. So the Russians have made way. Are they killing civilians there? I can't see how they're not. I don't see direct proof of it, but I can't see how you can drop that much firepower and not kill innocent people. But that said, it's a war. I mean, if you heard John Kerry the other day, you almost want to punch the guy in the face. Like, he's sitting there talking about bombing hospitals and this and that and, crimes against humanity against Russia and stuff like that. Which, no doubt, okay, there's some truth to what he's saying. But the hypocrisy of it, look at that hospital that was, openly admitted by the United States, hit, early spring or whatever by the American A-10 pilots. Oh, wow, we did it, and we'll investigate it. Where does that, who fries for that? Nobody. You know what I mean? And you see it all the time. Like, I mean, how many, after the highway of death in Iraq, I mean, how could you talk about crimes against humanity when your A-10s have strafed innocent people? Like, okay, there might be an Iraqi Republican Guard and mixed in with them, we'll just kill them all. Again, the highway of death, like 10,000 vehicles just strung out. Again, those A-10s didn't miss. Again, no problem. Drone strikes at weddings. I mean, the body count's over 4,000 now under Obama with the drone strikes. More than 2/3 are way more than 2/3, probably like 3/5 are pretty much innocent civilians. Why? Because of the collateral damage of, if there's one terrorist, you're allowed to kill 30 collateral civilians around them. That's considered justifiable by the State Department. And what warrants a drone strike? Not released to the public. It's secret. So, yeah, when you're talking about crimes against humanity, I think, John Kerry, you need to look in your own backyard first, fucker. I'm not saying that Russians are innocent on this, but you get the idea. It's disgusting. Okay. This is the one. Okay, we've seen Obama said the CIA is going to start cyber attacks against Russia because Russia's trying to manipulate the elections. Now, it's funny how they talk about how Russia's doing these cyber attacks on, and the buildup is very clear. And if you're an American voting, when you go to vote, okay, and even if you don't believe in voting, go to vote anyway. Just go to vote anyway, even if you think it's a sham. But bring your cell phone or a camera, take a picture of the ID of the voting poll machine, and your vote, for the record. Do this. It's not set up yet. Gary Franchi from Next News was talking about the idea of this, where everybody say, no, I voted for such and such. Because these machines that are being brought in 16 different states, okay, are owned by George Soros. So Russia's trying to manipulate, and George Soros owns them. What they're going to do is, George Soros is basically going to manipulate the vote in those states with those machines, those voting machines. It's the same machines they used in Venezuela, that type of thing. and if it's linked to George Soros, death and destruction follows. So George Soros will rig the election. They'll blame it on Russia, Russian hackers. Again, there's been no proof of Russian hackers. Just a lot of Russians are hacking us. Listen to Hillary Clinton. The Russians, the Russians, the Russians. And what did she say about hacking? It's warranted. Military force in response is warranted. So keep that in mind. So, and then of course they were talking to Biden about this. That Biden came out and said, I know I have it on the other side here, but I'll talk about it here. That they're starting to send signals to the Russians now. They're going to start attacking. And when he was asked, are the people going to know about it? He goes, I hope not. Because that means the Russians, they're going to do something that probably is going to hurt the Russians. If you haven't heard, RT in the UK, basically, the bank that they were dealing with for decades, or maybe not decades, because they've only been around for 10, 15 years or something like that, maybe not quite. The RTs basically, with no warning, they pulled their account. They said, we're not doing business with you anymore. This comes on the heels of what this interview with Biden. So this could be phase one. So in other words, they're sanctioning, going to ramping up the sanctions in other ways. If they're doing that towards RT, they're going after the propaganda machine. And Assange as well has also had his internet pulled from the embassy. It's down. So, and it's down because apparently anonymous state actors had it pulled. I don't know all the details on it, but didn't Obama just hand over the United Nations the keys to the internet? Yeah. Again, CETA over here in Canada about to be passed under Trudeau. Again, I thought Trudeau was this libertarian liberal that believed in democracy and transparency, and he's going to give it CETA. Fortunately, the Europeans aren't buying it. This one's a little bit odd. Russian Border Patrol opened fires on a North Korean fishing boat with the FSB. Apparently, these guys they found contraband on the boat or whatever. And they were a bit hostile to a couple of guys got shot and everything like that. So yeah, that's weird. But you hear of incidents like that between Russia and North Korea once in a while. But they were, it's something. I don't think it'll damage relations with North Korea too much. On the 14th, North Korea tried another ICBM missile. Apparently, it failed. It was another test. It failed. So again, North Korea is a long way from being a threat to the world. I think they're going to be a threat to whoever they launch the missile at. That takes them like a week to set up, but, that type of thing. But you get the idea. The U.S. to speed the FAD system to South Korea to get it set up. These things are being set up all over the place, all around China, all around Russia. Yeah. The UK is sending Typhoon fighters to Japan until middle of November, I heard. So, again, all this ramping up. Exchange, pilot exchange, drills with other nations and stuff like that is not really a big deal. That's always been going on since the 50s, whatever. But when you see the ramping up of it to the level it is, that's what we need to pay attention to, is the frequency of it. So the message is going to be sent, and again, Biden's statement there. I know it sounds a little out of norm, but with all this new carbon tax, and I hear Canada, they're talking about basically a way to save the mainstream media and the newspapers and everything. They're trying to come up with a way to basically tax the internet a little bit more so that it can fund. They say, well, it's to fund Canadian content. No, it's to fund the mainstream media, and so they're looking at more ways to tax us to basically quail the competition, that type of thing. But this sounds a little off, but out of thing. But it does play in because of the global warming tax and all that's coming in, the carbon taxes, which help fund the wars and everything. It looks like sea ice is the most sea ice since 2007. So, in other words, you get years where it goes up, goes down. 2013, 2014, the sea ice was at its lowest it's been, and now it's bigger than what it was in 2007, and the highest in a long time. And I think a couple of years ago, it was even higher than that. So the sea ice is getting bigger, both South Pole and North Pole, just so you know. I talked about the RT funding being pulled. and Assange internet ban. The Battle of Mosul, I kind of already addressed that. George Soros, the ring. George Soros rigging 16 states with the voting thing. So again, make a document of who you voted for. This is why I like paper ballots. Everything can be manipulated, I get that. And it's like anything, it's who counts the ballots. I like a little saying that Mark Twain came up with a lot of sayings, and this one was something along the lines of, people who don't watch the media are uninformed. People who watch the mainstream media are misinformed. Kind of also, the other thing he added was, maybe not all in the same sentence, but if voting mattered, they wouldn't let you. So Mark Twain, I think a case study needs to be done on Mark Twain. He does sound like a very anti-establishment kind of guy. I maybe seen a couple of movies of his when I was a kid. I wasn't really, obviously as a kid, not really into that stuff as politically or whatever. But we see it ramping up. We see it all over the place, stuff like that. And even John Lennon. John Lennon's take on the New World Order, like, I can imagine it must have went over so many people's heads back then. But it's so clear to people now because I'm sure a lot of people picked up on it back then too. But like there was stuff he was talking, very intellectual about who the New World Order was. He didn't name names, but you could fill in the blanks very easy. And it's the same people we're talking about today. It's the same faction. It just keeps going on. So that's why we got to keep calling it out. Now, I'll end up on this one here. Once again, coming from Russia, is this rhetoric or is it... First things before we get into this, is we have to understand Russia has been attacked many times in its history. It has a very bloody history in that. And because of that, they do tend to be a bit paranoid. They don't tend to take chances. They take everything that is said, not said, suggested, hinted at, into consideration. The Russians tend to think very forward. And I think their last convincing thing was Operation Barbarossa with Hitler, where Hitler kept telling them, don't worry about this buildup on your border, it's just a drill, it's nothing until it wasn't a drill. And they were rolling Panzer tanks into Russia. And in the 1950s, you had Khrushchev come up with a doctrine that if they believed a strike was imminent, that they reserved the right to preemptively strike. Now, Putin has openly said that in 2010, 2012, and he's still kind of saying it today, that if these missile systems, these THAAD missile systems and Patriot missile systems, surround us to the point where we can't defend ourselves, we reserve the right to preemptively strike them. Now, that said, they also know that's exactly what the United States government wants. The U.S. central bankers, they are trying to provoke Russia into war, same with China. It's very clear. And because of that, the Russians know that if they wanted war, they could have done this in 2010 and say, oh, you guys are on our border, we're going to go at you. They've had lots of opportunities. Their equipment is as good enough to fight a war now. Is a T-90 better than an Abrams? Is an Abrams better than a T-90? Whoever gets the first shot, I think, gets the first kill. Is an F-22 better than the PAC-50? Or we'll go the main fighters, an F-15 versus an Su-30 or an Su-35. I think the Su-35 and the F-15, whoever the better pilot's going to be is going to win. Both airplanes have advantages and disadvantages. I can't say one is really hands down better than the other. Warships, same thing. Submarines, same thing. The better crew wins. So like World War II, it's come full circle. It's the man, not the machine. The technology is good enough on the Russian side to go to war today if they wanted to. I'm more than convinced with that. I see what they have. Their new Ratnik system. It's a different. It's from a different angle. They take it from a low tech angle. Works no matter what kind of point of view, but it works no matter what. And it still accomplishes the same thing. So it's not as digitized, but everybody's informed. So the Ratnik soldier system is no different than, I forget what Echelon, the Echelon system that the Americans use. It's the same kind of concept where the airplane knows what the ship is doing, the ship knows what the sub is doing, the sub knows what the tank crew is doing. Everybody's kind of informed, so there's less friendly fire incidents. The difference is the Russians got the Ratnik system. It will work with satellite, but it's predominantly to work in, line of sight, as well as from like say like an AWAC, that type of thing. Now the Americans already have that, but so do the Russians now. So their system can be as easily coordinated, but it's not completely dependent on satellite like the NATO system and the U.S. system, which is 90% or 80 to 90%, I believe. You can look into it for yourself. Reliant on that. So the Russians, if they wanted to go to war, they've had several opportunities. Turkey shot down our jet, we could go to war with them. That time, you just killed our intelligence guys on the ground, we can go to war with you. And in fact, Russia has struck back. But they're meeting force with force. You kill our guys, we kill 30 of your guys. Again, none of it on the mainstream news. They are talking about the accidental hour-long airstrike against Assad's troops and also killing Russian guys. Now, the guy that got killed in the Ukraine, I haven't had a chance to really look at that. Apparently, the Russians are upset. People have been sending me the links on it. Thank you. I think Ukraine is going to hit a stalemate, like I've said, East Ukraine, West Ukraine. The Russians can bleed that one out for years on end if they want. They've got the upper hand there. They're not going to lose it. The only thing that gets Russia to respond into the Ukraine in actual official military force is an invasion of the Crimea or the invasion of Russia. Now, that said, an invasion of Russia, I mean a real invasion of Russia, not a handful of Ukrainian artillery gunners firing in over the border. That won't work. Russia isn't going to bite on that. The U.S. State Department thought the Russians were going to be stupid enough to bite on that. And, they overthrow George Soros and Victoria Nuland, used neo-Nazis to overthrow the official government before the election. Which Poroshenko, I believe Poroshenko would have won that election anyway. He would have won it anyway. And they didn't need to do all this death and destruction. But the key is that, so, I mean, anybody could see the writing on the wall. Yukovich was going to lose to, almost hands down, was going to lose to Poroshenko. There's almost no doubt about that. But here's the thing. Why the war then? Well, simple. The war was to get Russia to respond so they would die fighting Ukrainians to wear down Russian troops, which then they would be dying fighting the Poles. Once the Russians got past Transnistria, you got Russia, Ukraine, Transnistria, and then Poland. And you've got Russian peacekeepers in Transnistria, right? Or occupiers, peacekeepers, whichever you want to, depends what your flavor you want to throw there. So they're there. So the goal was simply to get the Russians to respond and have a war in Eastern Europe, wear down the Russian troops, and then NATO could come in after and sweep them up, with less opposition from the Russians. That was the goal. That was the goal. It didn't work. The Russians, they didn't bite. The little green men invaded, and they just took the patches off the tanks, and, that type of thing. So it's like, okay, yeah, sure, these are Russian special forces in there, and troops or whatever. But that said, the Russians locked down Eastern Ukraine as fast as they could. It benefited them. They now have Topolems there. They've got Iskanders in Kaliningrad. The Russians have got the area locked down without firing a shot, really, when you think about it. And as far as the poor Ukrainians, they're being used as a proxy. There's no reason for a war in the Ukraine. There was no reason at all. There was just no reason at all. And again, who funded this? Your favorite criminal, George Soros, stuff like that. The guy who funds everything. Again, it just goes and it goes. And there's so much I could say there, but I'm going to have to wrap this up. So the Russians, getting back to the election, and again, one of the things about the election is, and you're even seeing it on the CBC now, where they're trying to counter Donald Trump with, he's just paranoid. He's saying that the media is on Hillary Clinton's side and that the election is rigged. Well, I'm thinking what they're doing, and I'm kind of thinking there's a bit of a setup being done here. That, A, they're going to use this rigging. Obviously, their election's rigged already. Yes, the mainstream media is, all of them, are pretty much in favor of Hillary Clinton. Just look at the people, like whenever they have a discussion about Donald Trump, what's the first thing they do? They bring in a Democrat and a Republican against Trump. They don't bring in anybody pro-Trump. They never do. Or if they do, it's like a 20-second segment, and the person doesn't get a chance to speak. They try to come off a little bit objective, but not too objective. They're very pro-Hillary Clinton. So anybody even if you're a Hillary Clinton supporter, you got to be able to pick this up. You know what I mean? You have to have a pretty low IQ not to be able to pick this up. So yeah, the election's rigged. Donald Trump isn't lying. Now that said, the voting system, that's rigged too. It looks like the early voting, you've got people being bussed from area to area. Basically, this is why Hillary Clinton doesn't want voter ID, is because people are voting, multiple times. particularly in the minority communities and stuff like that. Not trying to demonize the minority communities, but they're getting like your Black Lives Matter types and busing them around and voting like 10 times in this community, that community, whatever. So they're doing that to vote for Hillary Clinton, not for Trump. They're not rigging it both ways. So Trump is fighting an honest fight. That's why he has to be so, just throw it out on the table. And the thing about that is, I think when Hillary Clinton this could be the lead up to the Civil War in the States, which again, what I've said is, and this kind of more goes to what I've been predicting, that there will be a Civil War in the States, no matter which way you go. If Trump was to actually win, you'll have an economic collapse, a civil war, a civil race war, but you'll survive that for the most part. Anybody that knows that it's rigged and stuff like that, they're not going to get involved with the race war. They're going to avoid it. They're not going to get involved with the Civil War because they know it's they'll fight in other ways. They'll fight for, to restore stuff. That type of thing. They'll weather the economic collapse because hopefully they've been putting food away and stuff like that. But lastly, when Hillary Clinton wins, you get a civil war, a race war, and a thermonuclear war with Russia. That I am more than convinced by her own words. Again, the evidence seems to be overwhelming that she's in for the Israeli wars, in for the bankers' wars, which leaves the Russians to say, in order to cancel the election. And again, this little hypersensitive buildup that we're seeing right now plays into this. I mean, the war rhetoric in the past 2 or 3 weeks has been, at fever pitch, right? But until we see Putin play the madman, I'll just say this. Basically, we're not on the brink of nuclear war until Putin plays the madman, which is going to be in a form of a few things. A detonation of a nuclear warhead on one of those Baltic islands that they were talking about to show the world that they're serious, which they are talking about doing this. Or B, they shoot down a crap load of NATO aircrafts in Syria. And then once we have that, then it's just about game on. Which right now, with all this going on, the Russians are warning that there might be war before the elections. This is coming from the Kremlin. So this is why we're seeing the ramp up in fever pitch ramp up in Russia, talking about get your citizens home and stuff like that. That could be it. That could also be a part of the make the Americans nervous to vote for Trump. This can go either way, but I'm thinking it's probably more legit because the Russians, they tend to state their hand and either call your bluff or whatever. So anyway, if you like this kind of content, please consider making a donation to the channel. Links down below. Thank you so much to everybody who has. Next to that, rate, subscribe, share, comment, like. Be true to yourself, be true to others. Always do the right thing, and have yourselves a great day. Good day and welcome. All right. Some people have demanded better g'day, hi and welcome, so hopefully that was better. So, all right. World War III update. There you go. I do like allergens. Before I jump into this, I'm going to give a shout out to Canadian Prepper again. I think out of all the prepper channels on the planet, this guy is, I don't know what his first name is or anything like that, but I think him and I are like-minded on a lot, so we don't agree on everything, but I like the way he analytically goes about things. Like he's an analyst on every little issue. He's very, very technical on a lot of stuff. His video quality is excellent, dude. It's not just like a guy sitting in the armchair with a lamp. You're trying to. That's the highest effects I can get there. He does a lot of good stuff. I did a video about World War III, whether it's going to happen or not, and the people that believe in it and people that don't believe it's going to happen, that type of thing. He wasn't the prepper I was talking about. Incidentally, I guess that great minds think alike or whatever, because he kind of came out with something similar, saying that there is a lot of fear porn out there, and I agree with that. That's why I don't like to use words like imminent and stuff like that. But that said, one of the things I try to do with my channel is always trying to go with, here's the dot. You think for yourself. If you think it's imminent, that's up to you, and you can take your actions accordingly, right? That's all I really try to accomplish, is to inform. Fear porn, I mean, it's all going to be a bit fear pornish. I mean, we're talking about pretty much the worst case scenario. I mean, we're talking like the extinction of the dinosaurs, but man-made. You know what I mean? Like that type of thing with the nuclear weapons. So we're talking about very horrible, scary, terrifying things. So there's going to be some sensationalization of that. There's no doubt about that. And of course, the way I've revamped my channel, he's talking about like all the people putting out stuff. I don't think he was talking about me, but I do realize that recently, after the YouTube attack of demonetizing, a lot of YouTubers had to reinvent their wheel for their channels to keep their monetization up. One of the things I've done is this new format of World War IIIs, which come out every few days instead of every few weeks, which gives you more informed, but it comes off a little more fear pointers because they're so frequent. So I just wanted to point that out. That's never my goal. That's why when people ask me, is it going to happen, by next Wednesday? When do you think it's going to happen? And I get good questions like, do you think one girl asked, do you think Mexico will be hit? I don't think Mexico is going to take a nuke, but because they're so close to the States, the fallout the radiation is going to reach there. Maybe not everywhere in Mexico. Mexico is pretty big, but that's a great question. Another person asked, like, what's really going to be targeted in World War III? And I did a whole kind of World War III targets. And you can't, there's stuff that they're going to hit that I'm never going to think of. It's like they're going to hit like a bridge in the middle of nowhere, and you say, why the hell would they have hit a bridge in the middle of nowhere with a nuke? And then you find out if a war started, that would be like a complete choke point. They would be able to conquer right up to that bridge and hold it. You know what I mean? Like things like that. I mean, if you look at World War II, bridges were probably even more important than refineries in some cases. Bridges where lots of men died. Many men died on a bridge too far. You know what I'm saying? That type of thing. So. But Canadian Prepper made some really good points in there, but there's one thing that, he said that I think I've said it quite a few times too, is take everything with a grain of salt, because, again, we're all access to the same information. Again, this is just the stuff a guy like me can figure out, okay? This is the stuff, can you imagine what they're not telling us? It's behind the scenes, I'm sure, especially with Biden's comments there, about, I'll get to it later, when he was asked, we're going to send signals to the Russians, and the reporter asked, are the people going to know about it? He goes, I hope not. And he didn't say that with very good reassurance, you know what I mean? Like, so what lunacy, and we're seeing, trust me, those signals are picking up right away. And I'll get into all that stuff as we go. But I just wanted to address that because, I do agree with what he is saying on a lot of stuff, and I did agree with that other prepper. I think it's American Homesteader prepper. I found this, but anyway, I think these guys make great points. But I think where I disagree with them and guys like them is that they're taking into consideration the rationality of these elites that they'll take us to this level, but they're going to go 99%, but they're never going to cross that detrimental 1%. But there's so many other factors that we can't even account for, like, what happens when a Russian pilot tangles with a U.S. pilot over Syria and one shoots down the other, or they clip wings or whatever. I think you're going to see a lot of incidents like that where, you're going to see a lot of damage before it kicks off as a war. But where's the miscalculation? What happens if the Russians really get paranoid and think, the Joe Biden's signaling, so to speak, behind the scenes, they take it as, oh my God, they just launched on us, like Operation Able Archer. Like, I mean, we've already been on the brink of war during the least ramped up time. I always suggest, how many, like on the brink, in the 1950s, Delta daggers up in Alaska had to get scrambled because a black bear climbed the fence, and they had nukes in the belly ready to go right into Russia. I mean, they were, the times are not, you'd think they're that much more advanced, but they're really not. There was in the 1980s, there was that war game where the computer basically had a simulator launch go on, and it had us that far before people figured out it was the simulator was still on. Meaning they thought, the Americans thought the Russians were actually launching on them. And they were about to launch, and the Russians would have been completely unaware. Until so that said, somebody pulls out, back then you used to pull out these big circuit boards and put in another circuit board, and that was your program. Now it's just, run program, whatever. But, things can happen. Things can happen, and things that we don't account for. And dead man switch. Somebody shows up, Ivan got a little bit too drunk the night before and forgets to show up for work one day, and the dead man switch kicks on. Like that type of thing. And there is a dead man switch, which I think went active in 2012. And, it's just, and then you just have to factor in the psychopathicness and the religiously insanity of some of these people. Some of these people do believe in the end times prophecy and, trying to force the hand a little. So there's so many angles that we can't account for. So what I do try to do with this channel and I know I'm going on a bit long now, but I do believe it's important that I do this, is that my goal is never to say this is imminent. All I can say is 2 + 2 = 4. You can't eat more food than you can grow. You can't spend more money than you make. If we keep going on these paths, again, this time last year, I was not talking about the crazy stuff I'm talking about this year. The frequency is a little higher, but of World War III updates, but the movements.